Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Maybe still. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you for coming today. I'd like to start our side event, 1.5 degrees Celsius business transformation plan, and navigating with a net zero future with a roadmap, which is hosted by JCLP, Japan Climate Leadership Partnership. And this is Kentaro Tamura of Iges, Institute for Global Environmental Strategy. Yeah, thanks again for joining us today. So today, we will discuss the importance of long-term strategy for especially in the business. So with the roadmap will show us what action are necessary and when to achieve a net zero emission in a 1.5 degree compatible manner. So first of this event, I'm going to make a presentation on our Iges roadmap first. So I'm very pleased to announce that that roadmap is just published today. So thank you very much. And this is kind of a world premiere. So I'd like to enjoy everyone to enjoy it. And after that, we move on to panel discussion. As you can see, today we have a distinguished panelist. So latter half of the this panel session, we spent more discussion on the importance of the roadmap. Okay, so having said so, I'd like to move on to my presentation. Okay, so. Sorry for. Sorry for keeping you waiting. Okay, so let's start the presentation. So first, I'd like to start with some background of why we need, start this initiative. So 2 years ago, up at COP26, all parties decided that they resolved to pursue the 1.5 degree goal, but the window to achieve that goal is rapidly closing. So the latest UNEP gap report clearly pointed out, because of the failure to stringently reduce and control emission, the now unprecedented action is needed by all parties, all countries, and for high-income countries, including Japan, I think. This implied further accelerating domestic emission reduction. So this leads to the first question. So how can we attain the more ambitious domestic emission reduction in Japan, which is still achievable at this point? So to answer this, we think we need a roadmap which show what action is necessary and when. But we think that roadmap should not be only about emission reduction, but rather we need roadmap that encourage positive changes in responding to various challenges, such as energy crisis, aging society, or rapid digitalization. So here we think the stakeholder consultation or engagement is critically important. So we have co-developed our roadmap with stakeholders in order to reflect their practical view, knowledge, and also make it more accessible to them. So in this regard, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to JCLP member companies, we held workshop to discuss this roadmap with them 3 times. Then through which we got very insightful feedback. So without their collaboration, this roadmap would not have been completed. So thank you very much. Okay, so move on to this roadmap per se. And this figure shows all about the roadmap, but I understand this difficult to understand. So I just point out two points. First, our roadmap is not kind of a compilation of wishing list, but rather it's based upon science-based analysis, which includes scenario analysis to deal with uncertain future, and also input-output analysis to make socioeconomic parameter in the scenario as consistent as possible. And also, we conducted power generation simulation, power grid simulation. And second point is, as I mentioned, this roadmap was based upon the stakeholder consultation. Then I'd like to explain how to develop this roadmap in a step-by-step manner. First step, you can see, we identify the benchmark, 1.5 degree goal benchmark for Japan. The second step is scenario setting. And third one is estimating some energy demand supply. And step 4 is just check the consistency with the benchmark. Then step 5, we conducted power grid analysis. And finally, we identify milestone and key action which are necessary to take to achieve the scenario we discussed. So I'd like to explain step by step with more details. So first, we identify 14.3 gigaton as a benchmark for cumulative GHG emission in Japan from 2020 to 2050. So what matters for particular temperature goal is cumulative emission. So we set this benchmark in terms of cumulative emission. And the number of this 14.3 gigaton was downscaled from 1.5 degree compatible global emission pathway, which are assessed by IPCC. The second step is scenario setting. So while we looked at both energy supply and demand side, but the key feature of our roadmap is that we incorporated socioeconomic changes associated with digitalization to demand side scenario. So what socioeconomic changes associated with digitalization, so which include teleworking, autonomous mobility, car sharing, Internet of Things, and circular economy, and so on. And what is important, we think, that these changes are not driven by climate concern only, but rather driven by some business effort to attaining higher productivity and our pursuit of more comfortable and safer lifestyle. And also, these changes are actually envisioned by government document and also industrial association, such as K-Danren. So based upon these vision and ongoing effort in the real world, we set socioeconomic parameter to 2050 and estimate changes in energy service demand. And another key idea of scenario setting is technology timelines, which consider technology market readiness. So here we refer to technology readiness level, TRL, which is developed by IEA, International Energy Agency. So highly mature technology with TRL 9 or higher were assumed to be deployed at the earliest timing when facilities are renewed. and less mature technology with a range of TRL 4 to 8 were assumed to be deployed in 2040 and or after. The third idea of scenario setting is that we assume the highest target announced by Renewable Energy Industry Association to be achieved. So actually the maximum deployment of renewable energy is a key to the 1.5 degree pathway. And you can see that a significant increase, in particular offshore wind, most of which is floating offshore wind, as well as solar power. So you may wonder if these numbers are feasible. So we conduct interview with several experts and also business persons, and we found that these numbers are challenging, but not impossible if well-coordinated policy are implemented. So such policy and action are actually incorporated in our roadmap. Then this is kind of other result of the analysis. So it became clear socioeconomic change could have significant impact on the decrease in energy consumption. So this figure shows the difference in final energy consumption between the current level and 2050 level, broken down by factors. So you can see from now to 2050, final energy consumption will decrease by almost 50%, actually 48%. And out of this 48%, and 70% is a result of changes associated with digitization or changes in the material use on the demand side. And also analysis results show the renewable energy, particularly offshore wind, play a significant role to meet growing electricity demand and also to produce hydrogen domestically. So left figure show power generation under our roadmap. The both dark and green, light green, offshore wind, and the light green bar is a green, is for generating green hydrogen. And green hydrogen will be necessary for decarbonizing material industry such as steel and chemical. And some portion of hydrogen is actually used for power generation, but its share, in the energy mix, power mix is rather small. And as you can see on the right figure, so this, only around 6 or 4%. So this is because hydrogen-fired power generation play a limited role of long-duration energy storage for seasonal balancing only. As a result, and particularly because green hydrogen is used for industry sector, the renewable energy will dominate almost 90% of primary energy supply by 2050 under our roadmap. And also this figure just shows our roadmap envisions more rapid and large deployment of renewable energy than government policy scenario. Then next step is that based upon the energy demand supply under this scenario, we estimated cumulative emission up to 2050. Then we confirm that cumulative emission do not exceed the benchmark of 14.3 gigaton. And also this roadmap showed or lead to 57% reduction by 2030 and 76% reduction by 2035 from 2013 levels, and also reached net zero emission before 2050. So our roadmap envisions more ambitious emission reduction than government scenario. And also that means significant contribution to global effort to achieving the 1.5 degree goal. So we also find that early emission reduction can be achieved when socioeconomic changes are considered. So last figure shows the scenario which assume maximum technology introduction of mitigation technology without socioeconomic changes. The right figure is our main scenario, which assumes socioeconomic changes with some moderate technological changes. As you can see, right figure shows the faster emission reduction. So this is because changes in production process and lifestyle will reduce final energy consumption and also energy GHG emission as well. And we also conducted power generation simulation and found that it is possible to meet electricity demand by the power mix with 85% renewables without excessive cost increase. So we conducted hour-by-hour supply demand balance, and also we did some, examined the electricity cost, and we concluded this, lead to this conclusion. In this case, the average invest amount from 2021 to 2050 would be 3.9 to 4.9 trillion yen per year. So which is much lower than current annual fossil fuel import. So this implies the importance of directing our spend, our overseas investment that currently Japan spent on fossil fuel import toward domestic investment on renewable energy. Yeah, and also in terms of energy self-sufficiency, we see a dramatic increase in our scenario. Then finally, I'd like to briefly explain our roadmap or milestone, which are necessary to be achieved to attain this the scenario we have just discussed. So sorry to difficult that figure a bit too small, but for socioeconomic wide, stringent carbon pricing should be introduced, and also behavior changes will start inducing by 2025. And this also leads to changes in industrial structure by 2035. So to ensure just transition, active labor market policy and increased investment in human capital should be implemented. And also high level of circular economy need to be established by 2045. And also investment in the intangible assets should be increased by 60% by 2050. And move to the building sector. By 2030, the new building should be net zero energy building or houses on average. And all new installed or retrofitted heating and hot water system will be electrified by 2040. And also by 2025, requirement of installing rooftop solar PV in the newly built detached houses become almost mandatory. So by doing so, by 2050, almost half of all houses in entire stock will have solar panel on the roof. For transport sector, by 2030, 6% of new passenger vehicle will be EV or PHEV, and by 2035, all new passenger vehicle are net zero emission cars. And by 2040, all new commercial vehicle will be a zero emission vehicle. And by 2050, autonomous driving and car sharing become common. And also shipping and aviation fuel will be decarbonized by that time. and move to the manufacturing. So by 25, digitalization of production process will advanced. And in parallel, the 30% of low temperature heat will be electrified by 2030 and 6% by 2040. And 30% of the high temperature heat will be electrified by 2050. And also by 2050, material industry will be decarbonized with using domestic hydrogen. And for electricity, by 2025, more ambitious target for renewable energy should be introduced. And by 2030, market-based grid operation rule should be implemented. And coal power generation will be almost zero by 2030 and completely phased out by 2035. And by 2025, 90% electricity will be supplied by renewable energy. And also, this slide shows more detailed action, but I will skip due to some time constraint. So I'd like to conclude my presentation, pointing some future of our roadmap and some key messages. The futures, as I said, this roadmap demonstrate rapid and deep emission reduction, which are consistent with a 1.5 degree goal. And also, our roadmap reflect major changes, and particularly socioeconomic changes associated with digitalization. And also, roadmap is based upon the science and dialogue with stakeholders. And a key message to achieve this roadmap, the bold action on the energy demand side is critical. And also, rapid and substantial expansion of renewable is also key. And so finally, I'd like to conclude my presentation emphasizing that pursuit of the 1.5 degree goal is opportunity for business and also to build business and new business and also prosperous and vibrant social economy. Okay, having said so, thank you very much. I will conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh. Thank you very much, Tamura-san. I think we will be slightly changing our layout on the stage. Bear with us, please. Great. All right. Thank you very much, Tamura-san, for your excellent presentation. And thank you very much for having me. I'm Miho Kurosaki. I'm a fellow at Iges and JCLP, and also a vice president of Energy Impact Partners. And today we have 7 distinguished speakers, amazing speakers today, to talk about Japan's net zero pathways. But at the same time, we need to discuss how this business and how business can take this into account for their own work. So we're going to be having 2 sessions in the panel discussions. First bus, everyone will be sharing their thoughts on the Tamura-san's amazing work, Japan's net zero pathways. The second half will be discussing about the real work, what we can do. So let me get started. We have Daniel from IEA. Daniel, so can you please introduce yourself briefly? And I would like you to talk about, your organization has been doing amazing work again on the global energy transition analysis, and also very similar 1.5 degrees analysis. How does Tamura-san's work, any surprising results to you, first of all, and how are you, IEA, is taking this to communicate globally?
Perfect. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you for the great presentation. And it's an honor to be here today. So at the IEA, I think, our net zero scenario that we've put out has become a very important benchmark for industry, for other researchers, for governments around the world to know what they need to be doing to be on track on the energy sector to reach a 1.5 degree outcome. The first version of the scenario came out 2 years ago. And a lot has changed since then. We've gone through an energy crisis. We have seen the rest of the COVID pandemic play out. And many people were asking this question this year of, are we already past the point of reaching 1.5? So that was the starting point for our important update of this scenario this year. And the good news was, while we had seen less progress than needed on some key areas, particularly things like coal and things like natural gas, we have seen a huge amount of progress on 2 key technologies, but many are included in this, is solar and electric vehicles. Just 2 years ago, we had electric vehicles being 1 in 25 sales, and now they're at 1 in 5 sales globally. So this is, the pace of this, and our executive director keeps emphasizing this, the pace of the clean energy transition is very fast, and faster than many people even realize, including people who are strong advocates for clean energy. So this has really kept the window open on a 1.5 degree scenario. The pathway to that remains narrow, but plausible, but we need to take immediate action. So this is why the IEA has been very involved with the COP presidency this year to lay out what would need to be true to reach this 1.5 degrees C scenario. Those are a few things: tripling of renewables, doubling of efficiency, which have featured prominently in those negotiations. Those come from our roadmap as key milestones. Additionally, cutting methane emissions by 75%. And then the last 2 elements, one is signaling that there will be a reduction in fossil fuel demand as a result of those. And finally, how do we mobilize more investment in emerging market and developing economies? This was our wish list of what needs to happen at this COP to keep the door open, and we're watching very closely, and we'll be putting out sort of the IEA's assessment of these outcomes shortly after COP. So now to the excellent work here. I think what we're seeing is very reflective of this, and I want to particularly draw attention to the intention to get to net zero before 2050. In our new scenario, we really wanted to pay more attention to this equity issue. We know that there are different starting points for each country, and they're going to have to go at different paces. So we talk a lot more in our new net zero about the equity and the responsibility of different parts of the world to move faster than others. And advanced economies need to reach net zero well in advance, aiming for 2040 or shortly thereafter. We see China hitting that around 2050, and the other emerging market and developing economies coming thereafter. And we say this very explicitly. So this is something that this is the expectation. So we really applaud that this new roadmap is setting that ambition and planting a flag that there's intentions to have this conversation on how to move that forward in Japan. Now, in order to do that along this scenario, I think there's a few things that need to be addressed. First and foremost is from an energy security perspective. Japan is an island. This is a lot of variable renewables to come on the system. And in the near term, a strong attention to grid investment, digitalization, flexibility, and storage are going to be key. You need to lay the foundations today in terms of the market design, in terms of the technology to realize that. Another key piece of this, and just to flag maybe, the IEA is putting out a report with the support of METI in Japan on seasonal flexibility early next year, and also another report on battery storage, which keep your attentions for. The other thing I wanted to emphasize on this to move quickly is we need to have more global cooperation. And this is on 2 fronts. One, innovation. The good news is we've already seen progress where our last net zero, we saw 45% of emissions coming from technologies that were not commercially ready. And now over the last 2 years, progress on that means that only 35% of emissions reductions in our net zero are things that are not at technology readiness levels to be deployed very quickly. And the final thing, and I'll end here, is making sure that industry and hard to abate sectors move quickly requires confidence that those innovations are going to be protected, that they will be able to profit from being first movers, and that these will not be a penalty in the global trade, which is very important for the major industries of Japan, and making sure that these standards are broadly accepted. And I think this includes many aspects of trade negotiations, and really considering how do we balance the playing field for first movers to protect that and drive the global industry on steel and cement forward together. So thank you so much again. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. I can't agree more. Energy security, great investment. Green investment, and also hard of it sectors, they're absolutely critical to have them on our side to move things forward. Next speaker is Tracy. Thank you for joining. And I would like to ask you, this work by Iges is one of the first of its kind on obviously net 1.5 degrees pathway, but at the same time, the work has been done working with business leaders with JCLP. What does this mean to you? And why do you think 1.5 degrees is important?
So I'll introduce myself, Tracy Wyman. I'm the head of outreach and engagement for the Science Based Targets Initiative. It means that my team is responsible for bringing market insight from the private sector into the standards that SBTi develops. So it couldn't be more important, right? Because while we are science-based, it means 1.5 degrees. We have to also ensure that the standards that we put out in the world are relevant for companies to actually adopt and implement them. Now, why is 1.5 degrees important? I think anyone can agree that when you set off on a journey, if you have no idea where you're headed, you're very unlikely to get there, right? Maybe you want to take the scenic route, but in this case, I think we don't have time or, extra money to be wandering around here, there, and everywhere. When we say 1.5 degrees is where we're going, it's the UN and the scientists of the world that told us that that's where we have to get to. We work backwards from there. And I'm really delighted that this roadmap has started with 1.5 degrees and then worked backwards.
Thank you. And then I know SBTi has been using, global scenario analysis, but, this one is particularly for Japan. Have you seen any sort of country-specific roadmap align with 1.5 degrees, and what should we do after this premier release?
Yeah. So I know that countries have been working on their NDCs for a long time, and a lot of organizations have been thinking about, well, how do we implement that? A roadmap that is 1.5 degrees aligned, I think it's very special, and it's very important that countries and companies as well think about not only the end game, that's 1.5 degrees, but what is their pathway? So at the company level where SBTi operates, the pathway is the transition plan. Right. So we ask companies to first make a commitment, second, to set their targets, third, create a transition plan, start to implement, and to disclose annually on their progress. And so the 4,000 companies that have validated science-based targets are doing that. What I'm really impressed and interested about this roadmap is the breadth of the view, right? I took a few notes. Looking at demand reduction as well as increase in the supply, looking at socioeconomic factors that need to come into play. So taking really a country level systemic view to the path that the country needs to take is not something that I've seen before. At Science Based Targets, we think about sectors. So we have guidance for the cement sector, the steel sector, etc. But bringing that together, I think it's a very powerful tool for the country. And if any country knows how to transform its economy, it is Japan. I think last thing I want to say about why this is really useful is that giving the different sectors an indication of what they can expect if the business sector and the government get together and say, yes, we're going to do it. Expectations management, it gives companies the confidence that they can not only invest in their own decarbonization, in their operations, in their supply chains, but also look at where are the opportunities for them in the demand reduction, in increasing supply, and finding, the business opportunities of the future.
That's very encouraging. Thank you very much for your comment. Justin, you're from HSBC, and given that you're part of GFAN's members, and I'm sure as a member of GFAN's, you have 1.5 aligned pathways, and then I'm sure you have released your own report. What does particular Japan roadmap mean to you? And would you use this roadmap for your own sort of work? I mean, I know we are going to talk about this, how this means in the real life, but how country analysis like this is important to financial players like you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Miho. And congratulations for the work. It's first of all, I want to say it's very country pathways are very important for all of us. You know, so I'm the head of climate change for Asia Pacific and HSBC. As you correctly mentioned, we were one of the founding members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which, you know, contributes to GFANZ. That means we have a 1.5 degree aligned scenario, which is based on the IEA's net zero scenario. And, you know, people like myself and some of my colleagues recently joined HSBC actually to help us achieve this objective, to make sure that we actually do take a science-aligned pathway. And as a financial institution, essentially we try to do this in three sort of ways, right? One of which is to mobilize climate finance and blended finance to sort of, you know, contribute money to that number of investment that we need to make. So I've been on a lot of panels at COP on this topic. It's a very heavily discussed topic, as many of you can imagine. The second is actually to support our clients in the net zero transition. Because as you can imagine, as a bank, we don't have a lot of emissions ourselves. We can also adjust our portfolio to make a so-called paper transition, but that is not what we want to do, right? We want to make sure that we bring every single client along on that transition pathway. That's where you can have real impact. So that's supporting our clients. And the third is to build a new economy, right? Which means that there's plenty of climate tech. I think the two categories you mentioned, right? The ones that need to be deployed today need to be deployed at scale, renewable energy and energy efficiency. And then, of course, we have to make the next generation of climate technologies commercially available for these clients of ours and other real economy companies to deploy at scale. So those are the things that we need to do as a financial institution, and we can't do it alone. We have to do it with other financial institutions via GFANZ, with regulators, with partners and standard setters and NGOs, think tanks, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe just one point, if I may, just on the Japan pathway, right? I think it's, as I mentioned, it's very important to have a country-aligned pathway. And I think, and please, you know, I mean this absolutely in the best way, in the sense that in some ways, if you look at country pathways, they're 80%, 90% very similar, right? Because they're all about scaling renewable energy, doubling energy efficiency, deploying electric mobility, and then making the next generation technologies available. So that's good. I think we need to bring that level, that conversation that everybody actually needs to do very much. The first couple steps are very much similar, right, to achieve 1.5 degrees. Now, the next level of discussions where it really matters, now, how does that apply to a country that is unique, like Japan and everywhere else, right? So I think the three items that you identified for Japan are very useful, one of which is the question of energy security, which worsened after the Fukushima nuclear disaster in 2011. You know, Japan's energy imports surged, and recently I think it's been even worse because of the currency issue and also the surge of global commodity prices. But renewable energy actually will strengthen Japan's energy security, not worsen it. So it's not an either or, it's actually very much aligned. I think that's a very important point. Secondly, I think the need to build transmission and grids. Japan has 10 grid regions and 2 frequencies. They're not aligned, but having renewable energy means that you have to build that infrastructure, and what is an investment that's needed to do that. And thirdly is, how do we scale renewable energy that's unique in Japan, right? Which often people say permitting or land availability becomes an issue. But if you dig a little bit deeper, actually there's quite a bit of land still available in Japan to build renewable energy up to a certain level before we need to really have a serious discussion about availability of land. So I think after we establish the baseline of what we need to do on 1.5 degrees, we apply the Japan lens, and then we can have a very fruitful discussion about what we need to do next.
Great. Justin, you might have been wearing a bit of BNF hat. we used to work together, so I know what you were talking about. Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for joining us. You also have different hats that you are wearing, and I would like to ask, you know, Justin mentioned about the climate tech, and I'm sure EIP, Energy Impact Partners, has been all of our work for climate tech. So any comments on the sort of climate tech pathways for this kind of analysis?
First of all, congratulations for the excellent analysis. We had a chance to talk about it several days ago, and I think it's very good. I also want to thank the interpreters. I'm a very fast speaker, and they do a very good job. So many thanks to them. We collaborated the other night, and they reminded me to slow down with my speaking. So I think it's excellent work. I think you hit the key themes of electrification, efficiency, cleanliness. The additional Japanese element that is important that you included is self-reliance, self-sufficiency. I think that's very good. I'm just happy you have such a thorough roadmap. I'm from Texas. I work with Miho at Energy Impact Partners. So I'm a venture capitalist by night, but during the day, I'm a professor at the University of Texas. And Texas has 30 million people. Japan has 130 million people. Texas has about as much emissions as Japan. So we're a very dirty state, and we have zero roadmaps. We have no roadmap. And so good for you for having a roadmap. I think that is excellent. My only comment or maybe criticism, but it's not really a criticism, but something to keep in mind is clean molecules are very important. You had clean molecules like hydrogen or ammonia there, and you showed making hydrogen from electrolysis, use electricity and split water to get hydrogen. But there are many ways to make hydrogen, and the markets have not decided what the winner is, and it might be some other method. And so that's one thing to keep in mind is we all have electrolysis in our pathways because we don't know what else to include, but there are many other pathways that might be cleaner, cheaper, faster, that kind of thing. So that's my only comment, but I think it's really excellent work. I think the themes you heard of collaboration are very important. Innovation is very important. I think Japan innovates better than just about anywhere in the world. So you've got the right ingredients for this, and you also collaborate. So I think this is important. One comment I want to make, you had in your roadmap, you had feedback where you use the information to inform the scenario. But feedback loops happen at the technology level as well. And I think of what Japan did for the microelectronics industry. You make the electronics smaller, which makes them closer, which makes them more efficient. So you can make it smaller again, which means you can make it closer. You get this feedback of making it smaller and smaller. Boeing does this with airplanes. If you use lighter materials, you can have a smaller fuel tank, which means you can have a smaller engine, which means you can make a smaller fuel tank, which is smaller. You get these feedback loops, and this will happen technologically in Japan. I think as you implement net zero, as you reduce your need for energy, you will reduce your need for steel and iron and other things. You will have feedback loops, and then it gets easier. The way it looks with net zero is the easy parts are first, and then it gets harder as time goes on. This is sort of true. And that's technically true. The first steps technically are easier. The last steps technically are harder, but the first steps emotionally are harder. And so the first step is the roadmap. So I think you're taking the hard step first, and I think that's really great. So my congratulations to you. It's really great work. Yeah.
Thank you. That's also encouraging. では、山下会長にご質問させていただいてもよろしいでしょうか。先にいいですか。はい。まず、この、ネットゼロロードマップですね。リコーの会長でもいらっしゃいますし、日本のビジネス界のリーダーでもいらっしゃるということで、このロードマップに関しての、経営者としてのお立場でコメントをいただけたらというふうに思います。
はい、どうもありがとうございます。リコーの会長の山下でございます。今日はJCLP の、共同代表ということで参加させていただいています。ありがとうございます。私、今、リコーの経営そのものをずっと事業成長と脱炭素 ESG の取り組みって両輪で、進めています。そういう意味では、今回の 1.5 度 C のロードマップ、大変に意義深い内容であるし、田村さんの自信に満ちた発表に感動いたしました。ですね、これをですね、やっぱりさらに今回はIges と JCLB 共同でやってきたっていうご説明ありましたが、さらにやっぱり日本政府とのこの連携で共有のロードマップに仕上げるっていうのは実行を早めるというふうに思っています。で、内容についてですけど、特に供給側のその取り組みの加速っていうのはもう当然なんですけど、実は今回のそのロードマップでいうと、需要側のアクション、これ、エネルギーの需要を2050年に 48%、半分ぐらいにするっていうことは、すごくヘルプフルなことであると。今、日本は日本全体でデジタル化によって社会の全体のシステム改革をするっていうことを政府含めて進めています。それがですね、1.5 度 C の目標達成にこれだけ 寄与するということが示されたということは、すごく意義深いことだと思っています。そういう意味で、これを官民共有のロードマップに仕上げて、そうすると我々日本企業もですね、脱炭素の技術開発に投資を確信を持ってできるようになると思うんですよね。それはある意味、新しいビジネスチャンスを生んでくるということで、大きくサイクルが回るようになると思うんで、非常に意義深い発表だったと思います。ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございます。お待たせしました。松川さん。富士通はいろんな形でDX も SX もデジタライゼーションの方もサステナビリティの方も取り組みをされていると思うんですけれども、このロードマップの田村さんのご発表で、こういったところを使えそうかなとか、あとは御社でもしもうすでに取り組まれている事例などありましたらお聞かせください。
はい、ありがとうございます。富士通の大塚でございます。今、富士通は社会課題からオファリングを全部作り直そうということで、社内で徹底的にそれを進めています。で、その中で今の発表にもありましたように、やはり脱炭素というと供給側に話が行きがちですが、需要のところが非常に重要であるという発表いただいたのは、本当に私どもも力強く思いましたし、我々がやっていることは間違ってなかったなと、今、山下会長からもそういうご発言をいただいて、それをますます進めていこうというふうに思った次第でございます。で、一つ私どもの社内の実践の例で申し上げますと、我々はコロナになる前からですね、テレワークっていうのは社内で推進を始めていたんですね。で、本当にコロナになった時に100% 完全に社員が在宅勤務をテレワークを始めました。で、今もですね、実は8割以上の社員がテレワークをしていて、通勤時間で言いますと、平均するとですね、1ヶ月1人30時間ぐらい減ってるんですね。もう非常にエコな状態になっていると。しかもやはり、私なんか家族もいますので、やっぱり家で家事もできますし、そういう意味では非常にウェルビーイングな感じになっていると。あとはですね、そういう環境が整ったので、単身赴任すごく多かったんですけど、ほとんど家に戻ったんですね。そういうことも非常に価値がありますし、さらに脱炭素も一緒にやれるということで、そういうのは卑近な例ではありますが、一つ最初にオフィスって説明していただきましたけれど、私どもの会社だけじゃなくてですね、そういう会社さん増えてますので、そういうこともやっていければと思いますし、この後ですね、またエネルギーの効率化とかサプライチェーンのお話も少ししたいと思いますが、ちょっと一旦ここでマイクを置きたいと思います。
ありがとうございます。では田村さん、この6名の方にそれぞれいろんなコメントをいただきましたけれども、どういうふうに生かされていきますでしょうか。
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to get some positive comment from the distinguished colleagues. So yes, of course, we are going to update this roadmap to reflect particularly technology progress, which, as Daniel pointed out, it's very fast, faster than we expected. And also, as Mike mentioned, it's new technology coming out, so we need to also take into account these new development. So that's one thing. So yeah, thank you very much. And also, この需要サイドの重要性についてですけど、これは得てして気候変動政策とは関係ないというか、としては扱われないような、そういったことも実は非常にこのエネルギー需給を減らして、でかつ、今後日本の経済がどこに行こうかとすると、やっぱりもうデジタライゼーションとか、そういった方向しかない。ただそれを突き詰めていくと、実は気候変動にもいい効果をもたらすということを、それは我々の方でもしっかりこのサイエンス、エビデンスに基づきながら、発信していきたいというふうに思っています。ありがとうございます。
ぜひ期待したいと思います。ありがとうございます。では、2番目、大きく2つ目のトピックとしてですね、これを使ってどういうふうにビジネスが動いていけるのかというところについて話したいと思います。So the second part, we would like to discuss how this is, how business leaders can use this scenario for their own work. So Daniel, are you engaging with any corporates using IEA analysis? I'm just curious. And if you do, what do you do? I mean, how are you using scenario analysis like this with companies?
Perfect. Yes. The IEA does have a healthy cooperation with the private sector, and in particular, trying to target industries that we know have large changes to make in this net zero pathway. So one example of this would be steel, and many other heavy industries as well, cement. But we have these partnerships with these industries and saying, okay, great, this is what would need to happen in this net zero scenario. Where do we need to go to move on this? And so just the other day, we released a series of guiding principles for international collaboration on decarbonizing steel. And this is something that will be a long process to make sure we're bringing different parties together and aligning on how do we move collectively together this, where are red lines in terms of moving in one direction or the other. And this will inform many of the conversations we see around carbon border adjustment measures or things like the climate club that Germany has proposed that really try to say, in order to be having preferential trade agreements on these commodities, how do we make sure that we are setting similar standards for the emissions intensity of those productions? So I think that's one area where we're heavily involved. The other is on some of these clean energy techs. And one I would like to highlight in particular is on heat pumps, because Japan is a leader on this with Daikin and many other companies being very strong in this space. And this is an area where we know that heat pumps are one of the not new, they've been around for a while, but one of the emerging clean techs that is rapidly scaling, that's going to make a huge difference in our decarbonizing pathways. And the one thing on this in particular is thinking about global supply chains. Heat pump companies have a large role to play in helping move the rest of the world along. But we're also seeing that efforts to reduce HFCs as well is also shifting the balance of global trade. And so really paying attention to how these efforts in different regulations in different regions are having an outsized influence on the technologies and the innovation that have to happen everywhere for these companies to remain competitive. This is another area we really watch and try to signal where they need to get ahead of this curve to continue to update their supply chains and have profitable businesses.
But that's also exactly the opportunities for businesses, right? If they change their sort of climate strategies along with 1.5 degrees pathway, there will be our own opportunity. So that's very encouraging. Thank you. Tracy, so I know you have been engaging with many corporations all around the world, and would you sort of take this scenario in your work, in your engagement work, and how would you do that? I understand that we have many Japanese corporations under SBTi members.
Yeah, we do. I will say Japan is the leader, for far the leader on SBTi uptake in Asia. When we speak to companies and partners in the region, we always point to Japan and say, look, you see where we can be going. So arigato. In terms of how SBTi would use such a roadmap, we would love to see, as other panelists have said, and I mentioned, that the roadmap be adopted by the government, backed by the industry. I think probably, without knowing a lot about industry-government relations, the industry backing the roadmap is a really good first step for government to feel confident that, this is the right way to go. So I encourage, and we will be pointing to it when we talk to Japanese companies. If the industry can adopt the roadmap, get it adopted by the government, then coming back to the question about science-based targets, we would look at the roadmap to give us insight into how particular, especially high-impact sectors, high-emission sectors, are likely to be developing. We'll be looking to see if the sector guidelines that we're developing seem to be relevant for the Japanese market, and to help us understand if in any case there's a requirement for either an Asia or even a Japan specific pathway. I cannot promise that, but we need to understand if the standards are relevant, and the roadmap will help us. It also will help us with outreach so that we understand what is the direction of travel. Who should we be talking to first to try to bring companies into the initiative? Because it's much more difficult to talk to everyone at once. So if we know which sectors and which parts of the sectors are going to come first, then those are the ones that we target with our outreach. Finally, in terms of integration, we want to make sure that science-based targets is aligned with the wider ecosystem. So the roadmap helps us understand what the wider ecosystem looks like and what we need to align with. Thank you.
Can I quickly ask for clarification? What do you mean by adapt? So business leaders adapt this scenario analysis mean that they have to use this scenario for their reporting?
If they use it for their planning. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Justin, so I'm sure Japan's portion in your sort of scope 3 emission is pretty significant. And I don't know any comments on the role of Japan for HSBC in terms of emission reduction pathways?
Sure. Thank you, Miho. Maybe two quick comments. But first of all, I just want to actually thank Yamashita-san and Tsuka-san for mentioning demand side. I think we talked a lot about supply side, but I think the demand side is equally important. So thank you for that. I actually maybe just want to draw out the obvious, right? Because we know that Japan has a 2050 net zero target, and so does HSBC and all the members of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. But I think often, not people in this room, I believe, but often outside, many people do not realize that 1.5 degrees and net zero by 2050 are not exactly the same thing. Because 1.5 degrees is a carbon budget and implies a particular pathway. So the fact that I think if you can put out this study in Japan to start a conversation that we're talking about 1.5 degree alignment, not just 2050 alignment of the net zero target, is a very important point, because 1.5 degrees implies 2030 interim goals and then the slope of the curve that we need to take to get there. And then Tracy, I think to your point about SPTI, so our business in Japan is mostly outbound. Most of the companies we bank in Japan have supply chains in Asia. So the fact that there's a high membership of SPTI and the fact that they will disclose scope 3 emissions and they have to align to 1.5 degrees on the scope 3 means that they have a greater impact across the entire region. And that's where actually for us, HSBC, that's what's very relevant for us as well, because we're a trade bank and we bank the sort of the supply chains and the flows of Japanese companies across Asia, the Middle East, and the rest of the world.
Okay, just to add, because I think it can't be overstated the importance of short-term, near-term targets, right? So it's great for the companies that have set net zero targets. There are 500 of them in the world, but the short-term targets are the important ones because we have to act quickly. And this is, again, part of the importance of the roadmap, right? Because it points companies, especially in the direction of where to point your efforts for your near-term targets. And the last thing I forgot to mention in how SBTI can use the roadmap, when it's adopted by the government and the private sector, we can point to it and say, okay, we are the gold standard for corporate ambitious climate targets, but this is the gold standard for how an economy approaches that.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Michael. So we've seen the graph in Tamura-san's presentation about the gap between 1.5 degrees pathway and the Japan's trajectory. And also Justin mentioned that net zero goal and 1.5 degrees are different. What would you recommend Japan on technology roadmap? What Japan should do to deploy in terms of technologies?
That's a great question and a good point that Justin made, that there are many ways to zero, and the speed with which you drop to zero matters a lot, building on what they said, especially for methane, which is a more active gas, but for all the gases. So the pathway matters. If you are at a high level until 2049, then drop to 2050, that'll be very different than if you drop very quickly and then coast to the end. So the pathway will matter, not just the destination. As we were preparing for this panel, I was reminded by multiple people that this will run on time. And this makes you think of Japan. Japan is on time or early, usually for everything. So I expect this to be true for net zero as well. We'll see. Yeah. It will go quickly. It might go more quickly than you think. The innovations out of Japan, I'm thinking like the lithium-ion battery we talked about on Monday night, adopted more quickly than people expected. And so I think we might surprise ourselves, and you might surprise yourself with the speed. But one other comment I'll make is not only is Japan very quick, but Japan takes and Japanese people take a very long-term view, more so than Americans for sure. And this is important for climate change because many of the people taking action today will not be alive when the benefits are really collected. And I mentioned you, I have a friend named Katsu Hirose. He and I collaborated for 10 years. Katsu worked at Toyota. He developed the Prius, the most important automobile in the last 25 years. Katsu developed. And he and I have worked together for 10 years. And he shows this picture of cherry trees, beautiful cherry trees in Japan, that his grandfather planted. Beautiful, dozens of these trees by a creek with flowers in full bloom. And his grandfather planted them, then died a few years later. And so these are like a memorial to the grandfather. But the grandfather planted the cherry trees knowing he would never see them in full bloom. He planted them for Katsu, his grandson. And action on climate change is a little bit like that we are taking action for the next or the second generation, just like we might plant cherry trees to give them shade and beauty, even though we don't get it. And then the trees become beautiful in just a few years, frankly. And then they just get better and better and better. So I think that's very, maybe long-term approach, and things might go faster than you think.
Thank you. That's a very nice story. And then I also would like to sort of remind you when we talk on the phone that you sort of told us that we have to deploy.
Yeah, so this is an important point. I thank you for reminding me on that. If you look at the history of energy, it doesn't go the way we think it goes. So the theory is that some scientist in a lab will have a new idea, and then they take the idea to the benchtop to do an experiment, and they demonstrate it at the size of the table. And then it goes to engineers like me, we make it a bigger experiment. And then it goes to applied engineers who make a pilot project. Then it goes to industry, and then industry will scale up and commercialize. And that process takes 30 to 50 years from idea to product. That commercialization from theory to product takes a long time. And it goes from science to applied science to engineering to applied engineering to pilot to product. And maybe this is the way Rico and Fujitsu are. This is a very typical view. But in the history of energy, it actually has gone the other way around. In the Industrial Revolution in England, 150, 250 years ago, engineers built steam engines. They just deployed these engines using coal. They burn coal to make heat, to pump water. They made steam engines, and they did not know why they worked. But they knew that if you made it higher temperature and higher pressure, it would work better. The field of thermodynamics, the science of thermodynamics, which is what I teach at the university, was invented later to explain why the engines worked. And so they just deployed steam engines and changed the world, and then scientists were trying to catch up. That might happen for decarbonization. So for Japan, I would say deploy, deploy, deploy. You will learn as you go along. This is true with wind turbines and lithium-ion batteries and solar panels. Prices came down 90%. The theory didn't change. It's the same idea, but it just got better and better and better because you did it so much. So I think that's a key idea to have in mind.
Thank you. Thank you. じゃあ、日本語ですみません。大塚さん。先ほど、後ほどお話しいたしますといった部分があったかと思うんですが、やはり富士通さんの中でいろんなお取り組みされていると思うんですけれども、具体的にその DX と SX 重ねたお取り組み、先ほどデマンドサイドを下げる取り組み、とても重要だと皆さん、パネリストの皆さんもお話しされていましたが、教えていただいてもよろしいでしょうか。
はい、ありがとうございます。まず自社の取り組みとしてはですね、スコープ1、2、グループ会社のエミッションゼロを、もともと2050年だったんですが、20年前倒しまして、2030年までにやるということを決めました。そしてスコープ3ですね、については2040年ということで、今年6月にですね、SBTI さんからネットゼロの認定をいただきました。はい。で、そういうことでですね、バリューチェーン全体を最適化していくということは、今の、SCM を考えますと、サプライチェーン考えますと、グローバルにいろいろな企業がそこに入っていると。要するに、物を作るところからリテールから卸から運送からもいろいろなお客様がいらっしゃいますので、我々一人では全然できないんですね。ですからやっぱり重要なのは、そこに本気で取り組んでいる企業様と一緒にやっていくと。 思い切ってもうデータは出してくださいと、そこを連携しない限りできませんよということを一つ取り組みとしては始めています。で、本当に皆様、非常に熱心で、すごく私たちも、そこに手応えを感じているんですね。で、我々は先ほど申し上げたように、社会課題からオファリングを出すということで、サプライチェーンの最適化であったり、エネルギーの効率化であったり、いろいろなことに取り組んでするんですが、ちょうど今日ですね、プレスリリースを出したんですが、インドでですね、ゼロエミッション社会を目指してということで、実証実験を始めることになりました。EV 充電のですね、最適化というシミュレーションを始めます。で、インドのフリート事業者からですね、車両と、移動データをいただいてですね、それを私たちの方でどういうふうに充電ステーションを置けば最適にできるかということをモデル実証いたします。で、これによって、やはりEV で、事業を始めようとしている方たくさんいるんですけど、やはり充電ステーションをどこに置くかというのは非常に大きな問題なんですね。そこが最適な置き方が分かればですね、やはりコストを下げてそこを始められるということで、このゼロエミッション社会に入るには、これは本当に非常に重要な一つの例だと思ってまして、こういうことはイギリスでも去年やりましたし、世界各国で始まっているんですね。で、我々としてはこの結果を日本にも持ち帰ってやりたいと思ってますし、そういうことを通じて、我々のビジネスも、どんどん進めたいですし、それを同時に、社会の DX、SX に生かして、もっと社会がサステナブルになるようにしていきたい。これが我々のパーパスでもありますので、そこに向かっていきたいというふうに考えております。
ありがとうございます。やはり富士通さんのような会社ですと、社会のインフラとかプラットフォームに実装されるっていうケースが非常に多いですので、非常にお取り組み期待しておりますし、先ほど海外の事例がちょっと先行している感じがいたしますので、日本にぜひ持ち帰ってきて、日本のネットゼロにぜひ貢献いただきたいというふうに思っております。
はい、ありがとうございます。
お待たせしました。山下会長。ぜひ、ちょっと先ほどと被るんですけれども、御社の当然、お取り組み、このネットゼロに向けて、お取り組みということもありますが、おそらく山下会長がこちらのパネルで、他の経営者仲間も皆さん注目されているかと思いますので、この COP28 で、この日本のネットゼロ1.5 度シナリオということで、どういうふうに日本の経営者として、捉えていくか、どういうふうにアクションを起こしていけるかっていうところも加えて、コメントいただけますと大変ありがたいです。
はい、どうもありがとうございます。今日はありがとうございます。いろんなアドバイスいただいて、さっきトレイシーさんもおっしゃったように、やっぱり我々のこのロードマップ、日本政府と一緒に日本の共有ロードマップであるということで実行に移していかないといけないなというふうに思うんですけど、私、経営者とかリーダーって何が大事かなっていつも思うんですけど、やっぱり将来のビジョンを明確にして、そこのゴールを設定するっていうのは相当大事な役割だというふうに思っています。そういう意味で、2017年にリコーは RE100 に日本企業初めて宣言をしました。ちょうど私、2017年の4月に社長になって、一番最初の意思決定がこれだったんですね。で、当時、いろいろどうもありがとうございます。もうずいぶん前の話になりますけど、6年半ぐらい前になります。当時の経営者の仲間、またはメディアからですね、山下さん、本気なのと、いや、本当にできると思ってんのっていうのをずいぶん質問を受けまして、今、無理じゃないのっていうおっしゃる経営者もいらっしゃいました。でも、私はその時の回答は、この話は実はもう待った話なんだと。もうこの辺でいいじゃないかって話には絶対ならないと。いわゆる不可逆的な取り組みだっていうことなんで、もっと早くやらないといけないことになるかもしれないけど、2050年以上先には絶対ならないんだと。だから、これはみんなで取り組んでいくことだというふうに回答しました。リコーの社内もですね、社員が、私はそういうふうに言うんですけど、社員がその理解と実際の実行者になったっていうことは私は非常に嬉しくてですね、2017年にその宣言をしたときは、実はリコーのグローバルなリコーの10万人ぐらいいたんですけど、再生エネルギー比率 2% ですよ。それでみんながよく言ったねみたいな話になったんですけど、実は去年もう 30% 超えましたし、2030年、トレースさんがおっしゃった途中の目標、今 50% に設定をしています。 で、脱炭素の CO2 削減も、実は去年45%、2015年に対してですけど、になりました。それで、一応自信を持ってですね、2030年63%まで削減しようという意味での途中の目標をどんどん前倒しをするっていうことは、実は社員の理解と実行力なんですね。これはさっきの需要の話もありましたけど、実際に社長がいくらやろうとしても、一社がやろうとしても、社長がいくらやろうとしても、なかなか実現できないことは、実は社員ができるんです。今、社員、リコーグループ8万人いますが、日々そのことを意識しながら事業活動に邁進をしているっていう意味で言うとですね、日本の企業の経営者がどのぐらい期待を、今日の話に期待されているかちょっと別なんですが、私はやっぱりこの脱炭素の動きとか、サーキュラーエコノミーの話は、実際には企業価値の向上とか、いわゆる事業の成長に必ず資するんだっていうことを共有をしないといけないっていうふうに思っています。ですから JCLP でも実は経営者の会っていうのを作ることに決めまして、来年の1月の終わり来年の1月の終わりに経営トップの会っていうのを、どのぐらいの参加者がいるかまだまだなんですが、そこでですね、今の気持ちを共有をすることで、政府に対しての物言う大企業、中小企業の仲間ができていくんじゃないかと。私自身はここ7年間、社員に2つの質問をして、ずっと2つの質問をしてきました。1つは、働くことで本当に喜びを感じてますかっていうのが1つ目です。で2つ目が、あなたの仕事は会社を通して社会に役に立ってますかって、これは2つ目の質問です。これを全社員が自分の言葉で語れる会社にしたいというふうに思ってやってきたんですが、やっぱりこれ、一社だけじゃダメだし、国際的ないわゆる枠組み、さらには日本政府の後押し、もっと言えば、連携をしたこのロードマップをですね、本当の日本の全体のロードマップに仕上げるということが実行力を高める、やっぱり唯一の方法かなというふうに思って、一歩一歩ですけど進めてまいりたいなと思っています。最後一つだけいつもこういう時に話すんですけど、私すごく好きな言葉がありまして、ご存知の方もいらっしゃると思いますけど、この地球って祖先から受け継いだものじゃないんだと、これって子どもたちに借りたもんなんだというふうにいう言葉をすごくいつも思っています。ですから私、日本人で借りたものって必ず借りた時よりきれいにして返そうというのが僕の方針なんで、借りた子供にこの地球返すときに借りた時よりきれいになってますかっていうのは自問自答するっていうことをですね、私自身は心がけてやってますし、社員と少しずつ共有して、日本の国全体がそういうことをね、思って、世界と共同していければというふうに思います。以上です。
最後に素晴らしいお言葉ありがとうございます。ぜひ、山下さんのような経営者がたくさん増えて、同じ思いを共にする方がどんどん日本、それから世界で増えていければいいのかなというふうに思います。最後に田村さん、今日がワールドプレミアということですけれども、今後どのような活動をされていくのか、ぜひ皆さんのコメントを受けていただけたらというふうに思います。
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much, very kind and beautiful comment. And as Justin rightly mentioned, so 1.5 degree goal and the 2050 net zero are different. They are different things. So we kept that in mind. We developed this 1.5 degree alignment roadmap. And also, as Tracy pointed out, we hope this roadmap will be used by government for their energy planning. And more concretely, we hope the ultimate goal of our initiative is that so government will use our roadmap when they develop next strategic energy plan and also NDC emission reduction target for 2035. But to be frank with you, it's not that easy to bring our result to the policy making process, especially energy policy process. So that's why it might be better or more strategic to work with business stakeholder, particularly pro-active, pro-climate business actor like JCLP. So may create some kind of momentum. We can still work for 1.5 degree, and we can work for more rapid and deeper emission reduction. So we can create that kind of atmosphere working with the wide range of stakeholders. So that is our kind of next step. So based upon this roadmap, we work, with various stakeholders, including JCLP and other business, to make that kind of atmosphere to create more positive impact on the Japanese policymaking process. Thank you very much.
Thank you. This will conclude the session. Thank you very much for joining us.